Hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, What Patients Really Want, Crawling Around Inside Your Patient's Head. Our presenter is Nicole Nash-Arnold. Nicole is a nursing career coach who helps great nurses transform into respected leaders. She shares her 15 years of experience in both senior and executive health leadership roles to germinate great leadership. Clinically, Nicole has over 10 years perioperative experience before moving into her nurse educator and management roles. Currently, she manages a privately owned emergency department in Brisbane. She has postgraduate qualifications in perioperative nursing and currently a Master's in Nursing. Nicole is a member of the International Coaches Federation. Nicole, welcome to the microphone.
Thanks very much, Sue. So today we're going to go through what patients really want and crawling inside their head from their perspective. And really this is about patient complaints. Because no matter what role that you play in, no matter what clinical setting, and it might be anything from an assistant in nursing right through to the general manager of a facility, you're going to be exposed to a situation where you're going to have a patient or their family member who is incredibly unhappy for whatever reason. And being able to manage that astutely and effectively will have a lot of advantages, and managing it poorly will set sail down a path that is very difficult to rein back in once it gets down that path. It's like the dealing with difficult people problem, but on steroids, because particularly in the healthcare setting, you're dealing with people who are emotional and they're anxious and they're upset and that they're worried, and there's a whole raft of emotions that are coursing through that sets them on edge and ready to explode for the very, very smallest trigger that in the outside world, when they're dealing with their life, that trigger wouldn't set them off. But in this it would. So they're really difficult people to start with a lot of the time. And when things don't go well, then it becomes a problem very, very quickly. In those situations, whether we're the graduate nurse or whether you're in charge of a shift or you're the nurse manager or the general manager, we use our natural born skill set to deal with those problems and deal with those situations. And some people are better than that than others. But it's useful when we can use a reasonably formulaic approach and a couple of skills to be able to approach that. And when you think about those situations where patients are really upset, and being able to use that formulaic approach will really, really help you, because the things that set people off will vastly change from what you might see as really, really uneventful and nothing, and them making a storm in a teacup, right through to the full extent of that continuum where it's a terrible situation and you empathise with them greatly. Times where I've dealt with patient complaints range from a patient who threw what seemed to me at the time like a galactically sized toddler tantrum about the fact that she did not have a private room when she was about to have her ingrown toenail operated on. Ironically, I walked straight into the room next door where there was a patient who was at end of life with his cancer, who said, "Nicole, don't worry about me, you've got other patients to look after." He was the one who actually needed my attention, and the ingrown toenail person, in my view, didn't, but she was throwing a massive tantrum. Right through to patients who were terribly distressed that their coronary artery bypass surgery got cancelled 5 minutes before they thought they were going to start their surgery. And you can really empathise with how that's really upsetting, and they cannot understand how that can possibly happen. Other situations I've dealt with was where the patient has perceived that we've missed their tumour and we've not dealt with it properly, right through to people that are throwing absolute tantrum again about the fact that they don't like the sandwiches. There are loads and loads of reasons why patients, and it's really, really important that you grasp that their experience and their perception is their reality. And if you don't get control and use a fairly formulaic model to approach that, then you'll bias to their situation is going to be revealed. When you sit down with someone that you think is throwing a galactic tantrum about the ingrown toenail private room situation, you're going to show your bias that you feel like this is pretty petty and they're behaving like a child. And you're going to escalate that situation really, really quickly. The same with the sandwiches. If you think, I've got 7 antibiotics to give out and 15-minute observations and neuro-obs to do and people to get off to tea and all of these things, and you're telling me about sandwiches, you're going to show your bias. And that is going to mean that you're going to escalate that situation really quickly. As opposed to when you give someone whose coronary artery bypass surgery has just been cancelled, you're going to give them the full weight of what your perception is and for that situation. And the important thing about the patient experience and partnering with them is that it's actually not about you, and it's not about what you think and what your judgment is about the situation. It's about theirs, and their perception is their reality. And that's why it's really important to go through what you do with a complaint each and every time, irrespective of what you think, and to be able to separate from the emotion and your judgment of that situation. Even when you think that it's utterly rubbish and you think it is incredibly tenuous, or even if you think that it's a truly terrible situation, managing the patient experience is your core business, whether you're as an assistant in nursing or you're the general manager. It's interesting about the fact that a lot of nurses often feel like that this isn't really part of what they do. And what's really important is that that's an interesting distinction about having an understanding of what patients think that they have an expectation of. And there's actually a body of research about how patients, when they say what they want from their care, they want nurses who are attentive, and they want nurses who are present, and they want nurses who care and make eye contact and are mindful. Whereas nurses, when they say, what does the patient expect? What do you want to give your patient? They say good care, clinical decision making, antibiotics on time. They feel like the good clinical care is what the patient expects. But the patient, that's all behind the scenes to them. And they actually want someone who's present. I've actually had nurses that I've managed who are very difficult people, and they will flap around, very officious, particularly a couple of women that come to mind that have worked for me, and they storm into the room and they slap on the BP cuff and they ask the patient the questions and they fluff around and they snap up the sheets, and they're very, very officious. And I think, oh God, I'm going to have terrible complaints about that nurse. I get terrible complaints about other staff members, how they don't like dealing with that person and working with them. But the patients love that nurse, because her flapping around and the snapping on the BP cuff and the answering the questions make them feel safe, like something is happening. And the other nurses who breeze through make them feel like they're not really there, and are they in trouble, they're not feeling reassured. So the way in which you engage with your patient is really important. And that's what we're going to go through today, about how to use that formulaic approach and to be able to separate yourself from that experience. So if we have a look at a particular scenario to start with, this is a story, it's a made-up story of a multitude of complaints that I've dealt with. No one particular story, but I've just made it a mega story for the purposes of this presentation, where parents of a 14-year-old boy several months ago, maybe even a year ago, was in a trauma, and he was in ICU, life-threatening injuries, came through it quite well, an extended period of time on the ward, an extended period of time in rehabilitation, was finally back. He was back at school, first month back at school after this terrible experience that this poor family had endured. A kid, another 14-year-old kid, as boys like to do, thought it'd be funny if he popped his foot out and tripped him up. And this 14-year-old had a fall, fell onto his outstretched arm. Of course, the bones had well healed, but not perfectly, and broke that arm again. So now, in this situation, you're on a late shift. They've come in, they have to have possibly a manipulation under anaesthetic, maybe a conversion to an open procedure. The parents aren't really sure. They've come in the morning, they're really upset, they're really distressed. They cannot believe that they're back in a hospital with another orthopaedic injury. So they know that their son is first on the 1 o'clock list, and off he goes around midday. And you come on and you're the team leader for the afternoon shift. And for you, your handover has been 14-year-old boy with a fractured radius and ulnar, gone to theatre and is coming back. What you don't know is that he's now not first on the list for whatever reason. He's now third on the list. And the first couple of procedures were pretty complicated, and there was a complication with one of them. So he was much later than he had planned. And the surgeon had promised to call these anxious parents and forgot, didn't call. So the parents are sitting there waiting and thinking, well, the doctor had said it might be half an hour, and if they have to convert to an open, it's going to be an hour and a half. Now nothing has happened. And you come along and you can watch, you get this sense as you walk up and down the ward that these four eyes, these parents are eyeballing you constantly, and you're not really sure why. But eventually about 5 o'clock they come out and they challenge you and they query the return to ward time. And you get the ward clerk to ring, but she rings day surgery, not theatre. And so the information is, no, not in recovery here. So the ward clerk says, no, not in recovery. So then you ring the team leader and theatre and they go, no, that list finished 20 minutes ago. Now the parents are standing there watching you thinking, he's not in recovery. He's not in theatre. And their first words out of their mouth is, have you lost our child? Where's our child? And they immediately, because of their experience, they say that something's happened. He must be in intensive care. The surgeon hasn't rung yet. And all of these thoughts and scenarios that have become a mythical beast in their mind start to take control, and their behaviour starts to deteriorate. And then you're ringing and they're getting more anxious and it's starting to get out of control. And then about half an hour later, the recovery nurse and the orderly turn up with their patient, their 14-year-old son, and pop him in the ward. And they still have absolutely no idea what is going on and what has happened and why the surgeon hasn't come. And they come after you and they're enraged. And they are so angry that they can't see straight. And this is a situation that may not happen, but all you know is that it seems like a really disproportionate response to the fact that he got here at 6 o'clock instead of maybe 4 o'clock. You've absolutely no idea about all of the stuff that's going on between the scenes. So now we're going to have a look with that scenario about ways in which we can deal with that, the formulaic skills that we deploy, irrespective of the fact that we think it's a storm in a teacup and that these parents just need to settle down. The first technique that we might employ is active listening. Now, of all the skills that we teach nurses, we teach a lot of clinical skills, and one of the really, really common ones that we do teach nurses about is communication 101, and active listening is one of them. So when this one came up, you've probably looked at it and thought, oh yes, active listening, that old chestnut, and it seems pretty passé. But it's the one thing that is absolutely fundamental and will make or break the way in which this situation is handled. It reveals all of the clues that you need to know and all of the information that you need to know. But it requires you to do this with expertise and not just sitting and listening and paraphrasing. There is a great deal to the old active listening gig than it seems at first glance. The title of this presentation was What Patients Really Want, and that's where this one comes into its own. What patients really want when they're unhappy and they've had a suboptimal experience in their perception is they want to be truly heard. And it's not that they just want someone to know that they're unhappy. You knew they were unhappy when they eyeballed you for the last 45 minutes up and down the ward. So you knew those visual cues that there was something not quite right, but they don't feel yet like they have been truly heard. And sometimes when we go through this active listening part, if you're able to execute this truly heard part and the active listening part, nothing further needs to be done. When they get to be able to sit and vent, I think we've all heard the term, they just needed to have a vent. That alone is sufficient to be able to deal with some of those problems. This can only happen through this process. And it absolutely cannot be a fly by their private room and tell me the story quickly and I'll see what I can do in between the IV antibiotics in 6 and the neuro-obs in bed 7. It requires your absolute presence and your absolute mindfulness to be able to sit and listen and hear what they have to say. And this alone may prevent a complaint that was just something that they needed to say and verbalise and vent. It may prevent something escalating right through to a formal process. And that's what this is all about, really. Being able to manage a complaint and manage people's expectations and give them the experience that they are after when they arrived at your health service at the beginning of the day is about when things go wrong and something untoward happens, which happens all of the time, that you want to give everyone the opportunity to be able to deal with that amongst yourselves rather than let it escalate out of control. There are times when people go to a formal complaints body or APRA just because they feel like nobody listened. No one listened to why we were concerned. This is the one skill that you can prevent things happening that are really, really arduous and upsetting and distressing for health professionals that are involved. And there are many stories where patients didn't feel like they were triaged adequately, and so they reported that nurse to APRA. And then there is a very unpleasant experience that goes with that. If you're able to sit and be able to truly listen and give them the opportunity to be truly heard, then you can turn that experience around. So in terms of active listening, the things that you need to employ in this is sometimes silence. You need to give them the opportunity just to be able to speak everything that they want to say in the time that they want to say it without interruption. Even the opportunity to be able to pause for what is an uncomfortable silence gives them the opportunity to fill that silence with more information that they feel like they need to purge. And that is sometimes the most significant skill of all of them. Listening for what is being said and what is not being said. In our scenario with our parents, the 14-year-old, they're going to be saying to you things like, you don't know where my son is, you don't know what the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, no one's communicating, what happened, was there a drama, was there a complication, we don't know whether he had a closed reduction or an open reduction. They're going to be saying all of the story, all of the minutiae, all of the little things. But if you listen to what is being unsaid, the things that they're not saying is they got a real fright. They thought their child was in trouble again. They thought they were back to square one. In ICU, and there was a drama and no one was telling them. And they just got a fright. They were afraid about what was going on. And once again, all of that pain and suffering they'd been through in the last 12 months resurged. And if you can sit and listen and think, okay, so the doctor didn't call you and you're 2 hours later than you thought, but it's not adding up, then being able to sit and listen and twig that there's something more to this story and there's more unsaid will be really, really critical in you moving through this situation with them. Paraphrasing is really important. Reflecting back, saying, it sounds like what you're saying to me is that you're really unhappy about our communication. It sounds like what you're saying to me is that you felt like we didn't know what we were doing and now you're having trouble trusting, our ability to look after him. If I hear you correctly, then, that they're the sorts of ways that you are able to say, and this is what I think your problem is, and that you can see how it resonates with them to see whether you're on the right page. And you have to dance back and forth until you know that everybody's clear on what's going on. You need to honour your intuition in the same way that you're hearing what is said and what is not said. And this is a core business of a registered nurse. Registered nurses can walk into a room and look at a patient who's otherwise fit and well and have had a pretty uneventful episode of care, and you know there's something not right. You know that they're deteriorating, but none of the signs or symptoms are showing that deterioration, but you look at it and you know it. In the same way, when you're dealing with patient complaints, you've got to draw on that same intuition that you use every single day clinically, and now you have to use it in a non-clinical context. But it is as important to be able to manage this well. Being able to assess in the same way the signs and the symptoms of what's going on here. You know that there's more to going on in this story, and it gives you a prompt to elicit more information and discern and make distinguishments between one thing or another so that you can drill down and really find that clarification. What happened? How are they feeling? What they want? All of that is there. They tell you everything that you need to know if you're listening. And using those prompts. Tell me more about that. What happened when you first were arrived? What did the doctor tell you? What was your expectation of how this day was going to play out? And they'll be able to tell you everything that you need to know about how to manage their situation. The next thing is agreement. Now, this is a bit odd, and I don't mean formal agreement, but once you've heard the story, once you really feel like you've had that dance back and forth and you've done your active listening, this is the time, even though you're not at the end of your dealing with this situation, at the beginning, being able to establish what it is that they want. Being able to understand what their perfect outcome is absolutely essential. This is the most universally missed part of this process. You assume that they want an apology, or that they want the process fixed, or that you want it to never happen again. But that's not what they want. They didn't say that. That's what you're overlaying. I know that in times where I've had worked for organisations and they've had a raft of things to give patients by way of apology, movie tickets and coffee and cake vouchers and flowers and bottles of wine and a raft of things to give them. And I remember a situation where a patient had been changed their rooms because it was over Christmas and wards were opening and shutting, and I think we'd moved them 4 times in 6 days. And something got lost and it was a mess, and the doctor didn't know where they were, and they missed a doctor's review, and these patients, the patients and her husband, were enraged. And I remember walking in and I thought, it's pretty bad. Walking in with a bottle of wine and saying, I know you've had a really bad experience and I'm really sorry, and handed over this bottle of wine. If he could have hit me over the head with that bottle of wine, I think he would have, because it was the last thing he wanted. He didn't want platitudes, didn't want things. He wanted to be truly heard, and he wanted something quite different. But I didn't ask him what he wanted. I just assumed, I'll placate you with this. It was terrible. Maybe what they want is just to vent, and active listening is enough. Maybe they want something completely extreme, like they want this person sacked. The person that's responsible for my beds to be shifted 4 times in 6 days, I want that person sacked. It's their right to say what they want. It's not your role to deliver it, but they want to say it. So you give them that opportunity. In our family with our 14-year-old, what they wanted is the doctor to call them. I want the doctor to call me. I want to understand what's happened. I want to know. Where have we been? What's happened? Was there a complication? Where are we at? Where are we going to with him? Are we back to square one? That's what they probably wanted. Maybe they want refund of their out-of-pocket expenses. They may want a different nurse. Maybe they want a different doctor. There may be a raft of things, but your ability to be able to sit down and go, right, what is it that you want? Then you will have a 95% chance of being able to deliver it, because most people are reasonable. Most people, when you ask them that, know that you can't sack the person that changed their bed 6 times in 4 days, reverse. They know that that's really reasonable. 1% of the population will be unreasonable. You can't control that. But for the most part, people are reasonable. And you'll be able to fill that gap, and you'll have a much greater chance of being able to deliver on that outcome. So using language like, when you walk away from this conversation with me, what's the perfect outcome? When I leave and you were to turn around to your husband now and say, well, that was excellent, what is it that would make this okay? What can I do for you that would make this situation okay? And they're going to tell you. It might range from, I don't know, to I want a new doctor, or I want the hospital to apologise, or sometimes for that 1% they'll be really aggressive and say, well, you should know. But for the most part, you'll be able to get to some level of agreement and a plan, and you'll know what success looks like. The use of languages and the messages that you send in this conversation are really, really important. It's the power of words, and not just words, but also their delivery. You have to remember that you've got an angry, hypersensitised, emotional, fearful individual in front of you. They seem like they're ranting and they're not listening to a word you're saying. And every time you try to explain the situation, they talk over the top of you. But actually nothing can be further from the truth. They ignore what they see as placating platitudes, but they'll hear the excuses and the stalls in a nanosecond. and they'll be on it in a second, and that will escalate it really, really quickly. When you say something wrong or out of turn, or show something that's going to inflame them, then it's going to escalate really, really quickly. When you use language, it's important to realise that there are 3 elements to how you language something in whatever communication that you're doing, whether you're asking them a question, whether you're getting agreement, whether you're planning the where to from here, whatever element of the managing the complaints, there are 3 elements to how you language it. Word selection, alignment, as well as delivery. So word selection really is about the choices that you make and the language that you choose, the actual words, to be able to say, problem versus challenge. Simple words like that where it's non-judgmental, non-threatening. Really important to use neutral language that's free of judgment and free of assumptions and doesn't expose your bias. Really clean language to be able to sit down and say that I understand where you're coming from, or, that is free from any kind of bias that you think these parents are just absolutely over the top, is really, really important in the way in which the words that you select. Alignment is about reflective of their experience. That is, you avoid jargon and it matches the context. The way the delivery and the alignment of your language is really important, that it's not, everything's fine and it's happy and it's great and everything's going to be okay, and all that is not representative and not reflective of their experience. They're going to be serious, they're going to be anxious, they're going to be stressed, and they want someone to match that. But when you're like, no, it's going to be great, then it's going to inflame them. That alignment, that your behaviour and the way in which you feel and the severity that you take the situation matches them. The same way if they were not too out of sorts about it, but really weren't very happy, and you've come to them with the weight of the world and I'm really sorry and I just can't believe this has happened, and then they're going to be like, this is bizarre. Your behaviour has to match their behaviour so that they can feel like it's going in the way that they're hoping that it's going to go. Delivery. Things like the way in which you deliver it in terms of pace, tone, volume, expression, words, rhythm, and timing. When you deliver something, and it needs to be fairly matching of theirs, but the pace, tone, and volume is incredibly important and sends messages like nothing else. So if you were to give them a message that you really thought that you could get the doctor on the phone and that everything will be okay, then they can hear your anxiety and your frustration, and it exposes your bias, that you're not really going to take the complaint seriously and that you really want to get out of there. Again, if your tone is very, very low and your pace is very, very slow, equally they will read into that you are, again, very frustrated, or maybe you are very patronising. And so again, you need to be really clear and neutral in the way in which the tone and pace and volume, and of course the expression, the words and the rhythm, but timing is equally important. If they're talking and you really feel like you need to get your case across and you cut them off and you say, yes, but what you don't understand is that, the ward clerk rang the wrong place, and then they say, but you should have known by then. Yes, but then I rang. That timing where you're talking over the top, it's going to escalate it incredibly quickly. So the use of that clean, unbiased language that is delivered well is essential. The power of a good question is amazingly significant. And if you're asking them the questions rather than you making the statements, means that you're giving them, empowering them to be able to take control of the situation, and it means that they're doing the work and not you, because you're just discovering, you're gathering information. It's really, really important. It shows that you've actively listened. It shows that you've heard what is being said and what is being not said, and you're across of everything that's going on here and what they expect. So there are some questions, even though you've listened and you'll maybe have a little bit of a disconnect, your intuition has said to you, there's more information here. The patient was 2 hours late back from the ward from a simple manipulation under anaesthetic. You know, there's not quite a match to the reaction to the situation. So the power of good questioning here means that you can elicit the information that you need. Again, questioning is part of Communication 101, right up there with active listening, with the old open and closed questions. But an expert questioner, there is so much more to that. And it is quite tricky when you're dealing with someone who is really being quite irrational at that time, driven by a lot of emotions that are genuine in their nature, that if you don't use questioning properly, then you're going to escalate that situation as well. It's a bit like a term that I use, a laser question, as opposed to the waffly, nervous question. A laser question will keep things on track, and it will manage a very emotional and irrational individual, because there's not a lot of deviation from that few words in that laser question that they can latch onto and start to derail the process. Doesn't have a lot of opportunity for misinterpretation. A quick, sharp laser question limits your potential to use the wrong word and language it incorrectly, and it will ensure you get to the heart of the problem and keep it on track. The premise and what's going on behind your questioning should be curiosity and inquiry, and that will help your clean language, as you are genuinely trying to understand through your use of open questions. But the nature of those questions in this situation will mostly be discovery questions. They're really about eliciting more information. And it sets you up to be more of the problem solver, not the defender. When you offer explanation or you try to put across your opinion, then it's not helping the situation. When you're trying to elicit information from the patient or from whomever is complaining, then you're able to elicit a lot more information and put yourself in the situation of being problem solver and not the defender of whoever. Some of the great questions, it can kind of be used as a brainstorm in this situation. As you ask your laser questions, then you're eliciting information about really what is it that they want, what is going to be an excellent outcome in this situation. It can cultivate their gratitude because they're appreciative of the inquiry. They want to tell their story. They want to tell someone about why this is not the experience that they were hoping for. Gives you the opportunity to see things from a different perspective. One of the most powerful questions is, how might we ... The how assumes that a solution exists. The ideas might, in terms of might, it infers that there are a raft of opportunities for us to be able to fix this. What if we did this one? No? Okay, what about that one? And the we means that you're doing it together. That if they tell you what they need, then you're going to see if you can get that to happen. How might we resolve this? It's a bit like a lever that opens a lid. They're the things that you just chip away and chip away and chip away to get to the core root and generates ideas. And expert questioners are never uncomfortable with uncertainty. It's not a situation where you're asking a question where you know the solution or when you know the answer. You may be very surprised when you find out in this situation, when you ask the right questions, it's 2 hours late since your son got back to the ward. That does happen. Sometimes, as it might have been explained to you, that does happen. Why has this upset you so much today? And they might say, he spent 6 months in hospital, in ICU, and rehab, and blah-de-blah, yada-yada, and then the next layer of that story comes out. And it's incredibly powerful with what you can elicit from someone and level of understanding, and all of a sudden you will change. The bias that you felt at the beginning, you're like, 2 hours late, how can this was storm in a teacup? Through your use of the right questions at the right time means that you've elicited something, a key piece of information, that all of the pieces fall into place. strategizing is something that is important for you to be able to start thinking about where to from here. Not something that you necessarily do with them, it's something that's going on in the back of your mind. You know, what's my best next port of call? This is for you, the last sort of 10% of the process. 80% of the process has been taken up with the active listening and the questioning and the ascertaining about what it is, what's the perfect outcome for them. Now you've heard the story and you know the what and you know who they are, why they're upset, you know all of the pieces of the puzzle. Now you can start to make that assessment about their perfect outcome and whether that's achievable or not. It's really where the rubber hits the road because you have all the information and it transitions you out of the listening and that inquiry phase and into the planning the where to from here part. Strategizing is a great technique to get your complainant to do the work and build that solution with you, if you can. Sometimes you can't, but for the most part, people are pretty reasonable and you can. It does prevent you from taking on that responsibility. You can't fix this situation for them. The fact that they've had a terrible experience with this trauma of their son and had this experience where they really thought they were going to lose him and that's driven this highly sensitised situation, you can't control that. But there are things that you can control. It's contingent, again, on you being an expert questioner. And it's in a way not dissimilar to really being able to assess the patient and their situation and being able to work out what plan of action. You've done the assessment. You've done their primary and their secondary survey, their head to toe. You know all the information. You know whether their chest pain is going to be caused by a PE or an MI or maybe an anxiety attack. You know all the information. So now you've ascertained in a way that might be a PE. What are you going to do from here? What strategies are you going to implement to be able to resolve it? It's the same thing. You know all the information about this poor family. How are you going to fix it? It's about bridging the gap. And there are 4 main parts to it. You know what their ideal outcome, so now you've got to work out their priorities. You know what success looks like, but reconfirming that with them, what does success look like? Simplification, and then work out your actions and check in with your patient. That's how you bridge the gap from the here and now to the where to from here. So when you prioritise, then really it's the part where they list their needs and wants. They're going to be saying to you, in this situation, you know, your son's 2 hours late. I can see that you're really upset. Your perfect outcome looks like X, Y, and Z. What are your priorities? What is it that you need right now on this late shift? I can escalate to my manager. I can do lots of things. We can fix lots of things in the longer term. But today, what is it that's really, really important? In that situation, they're going to say, I really want to talk to the doctor. I really, really need to know what's going on. I really need to see my son. We really need to sit with him for half an hour. We really need to X, Y, and Z. There might be a raft of things. I really want to put in a complaint. I really want to talk to the ward manager. I really want to do this, do that. But it's the priorities of what their needs and wants are. And sometimes they might be scattered and fairly illogical. They might just do a big brain dump of everything that they want in that situation. And you need to use the discernment to identify what those priorities are and being able to match their ideal from their agreement. They've agreed that at the beginning, you know, what the perfect outcome is. So now that they've had the opportunity to talk through their process, talk through and verbally process it, be truly heard, do they still want that? They might have started the conversation with, I want that doctor sacked, I want him, you know, whatever. They might have had grandiose claims about what they wanted. But now they've got to the end. Now they've said what they needed to say, and they will be calmer if you've done these processes well. And then you get to the end and you go, do your priorities that you've just listed to me match what you wanted in the beginning? And then you work through that. You dance back and forth and massage that. Then it's simplification, really. It's a matter of you being able to say, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go and call the doctor. I'm going to get to see where he's at, going to get him to give you a call. We'll give you a bit of space. Go and see your son. I'll escalate it to the nurse manager tomorrow. She can follow up with you. And then whatever else that they wanted. Then you check in with them. These are your action steps. Does that work for you? Is that going to work for you? And then they might say, no, I'm really angry with the anaesthetist as well. He said he was going to call me. Why didn't he call me? Yep, no problem. So what about we call the anaesthetist tomorrow, and then you massage and dance back and forth with that. And you make sure that when you leave that room, that they're in a situation where they are content with the plan. One of the most important parts of this process when you're going through the strategizing at this point is the acknowledgement. It is the gift, really, and it's not the bottled wine. I can assure you of that. It's not the movie tickets, and it's not the coffee and cake vouchers down at the cafe that I want. Generally speaking, most people don't want those things. And maybe after the raw emotion has passed, then they might appreciate that. They might appreciate the fact that their emergency fees are waived, or their excess is waived, or their costs for whatever. There's lots of things. But in this situation, in the raw point, then they don't want the physical gift. They often just want the acknowledgement, not that they have a right to complain. They just want acknowledgement that there's a problem. And that's sometimes really hard for clinicians to do, because in your view, what you think they got was spot on care. Their son was treated well. His care was excellent. He got prompt care. He's back in the ward. His clinical pathway is perfect. But for a range of filters, then these parents are really, really unhappy. And you might think, I've got nothing to complain about. But their experience is different, and their expectation is different, and that's their journey. So you need to say, look, you had an expectation, given the circumstances of your anxiety, from the 12 months that you've had with your son since his trauma, that you really, really needed to speak to someone to know that he was okay. I understand that. The acknowledgement that that is not perfect, that engagement in the family and communication was poor, acknowledgement that that is suboptimal goes a long way to being able to just settle that raw emotion down. They've had the opportunity to vent, they feel truly heard, and now someone's saying, yep, I get it, I really do. It moves them from that feeling of being disempowered, which is what a lot of complaints are often about, that from the patients want to feel empowered. What they really, really want is control over their situations. And when they complain, it's often because they have lost control. So they need to move from a place of being disempowered to empowered. And they often do things like they make physical complaints when they're feeling really disempowered, that they will judge and feel that they are being judged. They'll do things that are out of character, and that they ramp the situation, they exaggerate it because they're feeling really disempowered. And you want to move them to a place where they've got clarity and they've got a lightness, and they're back to the authentic person that they are, and that they have some energy and commitment, and that they're settled. That's the sign of an empowered patient or their family. And that's where that acknowledgement can move them from disempowered to empowered. And you can do that in a number of ways. Endorsing, like I've just said, yeah, I get it. I really understand how this has upset you. It makes them feel like you've empathised with them, and that in itself is endorsed their experience. It's their experience, it's not what they wanted. Wanting for. This is the greatest way of demonstrating that you're the patient advocate that we all should be. What you wanted for that patient was that they came with their son and they felt trust with the healthcare team, that they were happy with the care, that they felt like they and their son were safe and being well looked after. And that's not what they got. That's not how they felt. And none of us as health professions want that for our patients or their families. And being able to say to them, what I want for you is that you have trust in us, and that we are going to do everything and make your son, give him the best care that we can. That I want for you is a really powerful way of saying that's a reasonable thing to want, that you feel trust in your son's healthcare team. That's what I want for you. And that's how you start to work through how you're going to get it. And removing barriers. that process of the simpler priorities and simplification is endorsing as a way of acknowledging their process, to be able to go, these are the way I'm going to remove the barriers. You wanted communication, you didn't get it. I'm going to ring the doctor, I'm going to communicate with my nurse manager, I'm going to ring the hospital coordinator, I'm going to, whoever you're going to do so that you can get what they want, means that you're saying, yes, I get you. This is what we're going to do about it to remove those barriers so that you can again feel trust in us. Sometimes directness is really, really important. One of the greatest mistakes in this situation to make them feel disempowered and unacknowledged is to be able to quote a policy. Well, it's our policy that you don't wait in recovery for your son. So, really sorry, but that's the policy of the hospital. Nothing worse. It might be the policy. They might be saying, I want next time to be in the recovery with my son the whole time. I want this, I want to be able to do that. And then your response is, sorry, that's not the policy, is really frustrating to them, and it will escalate them really, really quickly and make them feel more disempowered because you're not removing barriers. The policy actually increases the barriers and they feel further and further toward that disempowerment end of the continuum. So to be able to say to them, yeah, that directness of, I understand that you didn't get to stay with your son and now this is the situation that you're in. That's the silence of that is incredibly powerful, the opposite to the hiding behind the policy, that being direct or being silent. As tempting as it is to argue your case, to say, it wasn't my fault, I tried to ring recovery, I tried to ring the team leader, I tried to do this. You are not part of this story. It's the organisation, it's the process, it's their experience. And they don't actually particularly care about the you part of it. And it is really, really, really frustrating. Sometimes you just have to stand there and cop the fact that it wasn't you, it was someone else. And it's like when you ring the bank and you say, how have you done this? You've closed down my account accidentally and blah, blah, and their response is, well, madam, it's not actually, I didn't do that. But, 17, I can transfer you through to 17 different people and, you can talk to this department or that department. It's just more barriers. Sometimes just being able to stand there and being able to say, yep, I understand it wasn't what you wanted, and that silence puts them further toward the empowered into that continuum rather than that disempowered. Finally, and this is hopefully the last stage, you've walked away from them, you've executed what they hoped, what they wanted, what their perfect outcome was, or that you've renegotiated that outcome. And you're like, no, I don't want the person sacked, but what I do want is X, Y, and Z. And so you've walked away and they're clearly more empowered and happier than they were at the beginning of that conversation. Now it is time to escalate. Because even though you feel like you've absolutely nailed that situation and you have got 3 very happy little campers and they've talked to the doctor and the anaesthetist and they've been with their son and they're feeling really, really good, and then they go home and tell their neighbour about it at a barbecue, and the barbecue friend goes, that's terrible. You should make a formal complaint about that and write a letter. Then all of a sudden it rears its ugly head and your poor nurse unit manager or your general manager or whoever receives the complaint has got this story that really catches them unawares. So it's really important to be able to escalate that so that they can have the information that they need. So taking the time to send an email is really, really important. Gone are the days, and a nurse manager's pet hate is little scrappy bits of paper that are you've written all around up the side and around the corner and left it on her keyboard for the next day to deal with. Send an email. It's unemotional. Dot points are really, really powerful in this situation because this will have been an emotional couple of hours for you. There will be emotions on both sides running hot, and you've de-escalated it, but still, it's not the shift that you hoped for at the beginning when you turned up for your 2:30 to 11. So dot points are really, really significant at being able to remove that emotion. The other thing that I've always done is hopefully you've got enough time before the end of your shift that midway you can write the email. and leave it open or save it as a draft and then come back to it later and then reread it. Every time I've ever done that, I've reread it and thought, I won't remove that part and that's irrelevant and better add this. By writing it immediately means that you add all the facts, but you generally do add some emotion despite dot points and your best efforts. And then when you come back a couple of hours later and you read through it again, you're a lot more rational and level-headed, a couple of hours and a good cup of tea and a talk in the tea room. So you can come back. The greatest formula is the PAR formula, that you've written the problem, the actions and the result. There's not a lot more that needs to be said. Patient was 2 hours later back to the ward, family were really upset, blah, spoke to them, offered them this, did this, got the anaesthetist, got the surgeon to come back and talk to them. The result was they're very happy with that. And now that they've spoken to the doctor and they have a plan and they understand what's happened in the last couple of hours, they're happy. Then the nurse manager's always got that to refer to later in the event that it does rear back up, if in fact that it does. So these are the processes that we go through, and they are the more advanced version of hopefully the communication 101 that you've often been through, where we're using active listening, allowing them the opportunity to vent, giving them the opportunity to give you more information through the use of laser questions that are unemotional with clean language. You've strategized with them by establishing what the priorities are, simplifying, giving them a plan of action. And you've moved them through acknowledging their experience. You've moved them from a place of feeling disempowered to empowered. On my website here, I've got a range of resources, a couple of worksheets to be able to go through that strategizing process, as well as a couple of articles about patient experience and being able to manage that irrespective of who you are in the organisation, as well as a couple of other resources that I think would be useful when you're navigating through a situation where a patient is very unhappy, and to try and understand what it is that they really want from that experience.
Nicole, thank you very much for an exceptionally interesting presentation. I now understand complaints management exceptionally well.
Thank you.
It's interesting though, isn't it? As soon as there's a number of reactions that come from nurses when there's someone who isn't happy. And a lot of nurses just like, if you avert your eyes, the bad things will go away.
Yes.
Rather than trying to empathise with these people, as you rightly say, but, asking the right questions. And it's not only a reflection of you as a nurse that these people experience these problems. It reflects on your colleagues. It reflects on your organisation. It reflects on the profession in general. Like, if you only come up against the nursing profession once, and it happened with the scenario that you identified, then every barbecue you're going to go to and someone mentions a nurse, you're going to give that whole story, aren't you?
Absolutely.
The day they lost my son. How can you trust these people?
Left hand didn't know what the right hand's doing, and every time the story is told, it will take on another mythical beast element and it will be bigger than Ben-Hur. Not because, people are, they're lying about it, but just, they remember it worse each time if you don't manage it.
It becomes their truth.
Yes.
Because people's perception is truth, and as the story evolves in their head, like people actually have conversations in their head.
Yes.
That, sort of then creates as you say, a bigger than Ben-Hur scenario.
And nurses are, absolutely. And nurses are exceptional analysts. That's really what we do. We just analyse clinical information. But this is an extension of that, really, because patients are giving you the visual cues. You can walk into a room and feel that tension, feel them watching you, feel the behaviour and the disengagement that, they're not really chatting about, whatever. There are lots of visual cues to know that there's a problem here. And by ignoring it, it won't go away. just like it does it
And
clinically.
if you address the elephant, that's half the problem.
Absolutely.
Because if they can see that they've, finally come across someone who has a bit of common sense and is willing to listen to their story and can provide some strategies on how they're going to rectify it, then that just calms everything down.
Absolutely.
If someone runs in and shoves some tablets at someone and runs out the door before they, are asked a question because they just don't want to deal with the complaint, then it just festers.
And patients will just fill in the gaps. They'll just go, oh, they don't care. Oh, they're too busy. Oh, they haven't identified that, my husband's actually really, really sick because they're too busy running in and out. And then one thing leads to another. And you've got a very unhappy situation that could have been nipped in that bud.
Or they're too busy running in and out, but I can hear them talking at the office.
Yes, exactly.
They've got time to talk to at the office, but I'm sitting here seething because my issues haven't been addressed. So then that just adds to the whole scenario.
And the worst thing is once one thing goes wrong, they really start to look at everything, and then they start to watch the little piece of paper that was sitting under the sink and that the cleaners didn't pick it up for 3 days, and, the food is terrible, and, they really start to value add in their experience.
Because once you're on that downhill trajectory, there's nothing more that they want to do rather than to be able to ratify their feeling or their belief. So they'll start to look for things then.
Yep, exactly right.
To validate their story. And then when they actually do finally get to articulate the story in full, it's the poor person that ends up getting read the book that, suffers the most.
Whereas if you can precipitate that at the beginning, the watershed can often be enough.
That's it. And everyone can move on and people aren't wrong. People actually have a right to question.
Yes.
And I think as nurses sometimes we take things very personally. Where the issue isn't with us as a person, the issue is with the system in which we work. That something has gone out of sync that has caused the experience for these people.
Yep.
So I think if you can depersonalise the issue and recognise they have a right to comment and have a right to expectation, then you can all move forward together.
Exactly. And nurses are incredible about focusing on our KPIs in terms of our measure are the clinical outcomes, as they always should be. But it's not the only. There are qualitative and quantitative KPIs for our care. And in an emergency department, the fact that a patient was seen within their triage time, that their daughter antibiotic time or their daughter analgesia time was absolutely spot on, and we warded off their sepsis and their deterioration, and they have no idea about any of that. But they know that no one got them a warm blanket and they shivered for 3 hours.
That's it. See, it's all to do with patient happiness.
Yes.
Because the general public actually come into our services with the assumption that we, one, know what we're doing, and secondly, will apply the science. So that's just a given.
That's a given.
That's the given. The happiness part comes from the fact that we're also maybe human in the way we deliver the service, and that we recognise their innate human needs as well.
Yeah.
So, the KPIs mean nothing to them because they just assume you would do that anyway.
Exactly. They
assume you're clever.
They have absolute faith that we're going to deliver what we should be delivering.
God love them, that's right. It's a very interesting system in which we live and work, may I suggest. Nicole, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation.
My pleasure.
To everyone who's listening, I wish you an absolutely exceptional day, and I look forward to seeing you online at another webinar very soon. Goodbye.